Midnight rain fell like a curtain, heavy and straight, turning the road into a slow river that swallowed light. The corner shop's awning chattered under the drops, and the neon open sign hummed like a small insect fighting sleep. Miriam stood in the doorway with a paper bag against her chest, counting coins with cold fingers and thinking of warm tea. Then she saw the child. A little figure at the crosswalk, still, centered like someone had placed her there on purpose. Red umbrella. Yellow boots. The water reached her shins where the road dipped, yet she didn't move or wave or call. She only stood, head down, umbrella lowered just enough to hide her face. Cars hissed by with their lights smeared by the rain. No adult walked beside her. No voice called her name. The whole street felt paused, waiting to see what the child would do next. "You're lost," Miriam said, leaning out of the doorframe so the rain didn't catch her shoulder. Her voice sounded thin in the storm. "Do you need help?" The child didn't lift her head. A small nod. "Home is close," she said. The voice was soft and steady, not crying, not afraid. "Will you walk me?" Miriam looked up and down the street again, the way people do when they hope someone else will step in and take the decision away. The shop owner was in the back room wrestling with a mop and a bucket. The bus stop was empty. The upper windows of the buildings were black or blue-white with televisions. She felt the kind pull that happens when someone smaller asks for help and there is no one else around. She opened her umbrella, stepped into the rain, and the noise changed against the fabric. Hard drops turned to a padded drumming. "Come on," she said. "We'll go together." The child left the crosswalk and came to her side, steps steady, umbrella closed and tucked against her shoulder like a flag at rest. They walked. The flood made small wakes around their legs. Streetlight pools stretched thin like oil over water and broke under their shoes. The smell of metal and wet stone was strong, and beneath it, something green and deeper, like the scent that rises from a riverbank after a long storm. Miriam tried to see the child's face, but the red dome hid it well. All she caught was a pale chin, clean and still, the color of paper. "Which way?" Miriam asked. "Straight," the child said. Then left. The building with the blue door. The left-hand shops were closed and shuttered. A tailor's sign tapped a loose chain in the wind. The rain softened around them for a moment as if a cloud had shifted, then thickened again, and the drains at the curb spoke in long throats as water spun into them. Miriam listened to the sound. It wasn't only gurgling. It was like breath, slow, regular, patient. She looked down at the pavement to step over a jagged crack. That was when she noticed it. Two shadows stretched under the streetlight. One was hers, ordinary, umbrella shape, shoulders, coat hem. The other, smaller body, should have had a small round shadow. Instead, the child's shadow looked too long, as if arms were pulled thin and a thin, dark tail dragged behind. Miriam blinked and lifted her umbrella higher. The shadow returned to normal. She swallowed and told herself she was tired, that rain plays tricks with outlines. They turned left. The buildings here were older. Balconies leaned forward like watchers with bad posture. Paint peeled in long curls. A cat sat in a window and didn't blink. The flood was shallower here but colder, as if it came from somewhere not exactly the sky. Miriam's toes felt numb in her shoes. The child seemed not to notice the cold at all. "Almost there?" Miriam asked. "Top floor," said the child. "Blue door. Are your parents home?" A small pause. "He hates loud knocks," the child said. "Who?" The child didn't answer. Only the rain answered, in a long smooth sheet that slid off the lip of a balcony and broke into 1,000 tiny snakes over the pavement. Miriam felt a tickle along her ankle, not quite a current, not quite a thread. She shook her foot without looking down and kept walking. They reached the building with the blue door. It sat in a row of identical mouths, green, brown, black, each with a buzzer panel and a little light above. The blue door was a tired blue, scratched white in a circle around the lock where hands had missed in the dark. The buzzer lights were dead, the glass in the panel black enough to reflect the street. In that reflection Miriam saw herself and the child under their umbrellas, the small scene contained and neat. Behind the glass, for a breath, the reflection looked wider, like water behind a window. Then it was just glass again. Miriam put her hand on the handle, ready to try it, expecting it to be locked. It turned with an easy click as if someone had oiled it that afternoon. "Lucky," she said, and heard the word fall too loudly into the hallway beyond. They stepped inside and closed their umbrellas. Drops hit the tile with a sound like coins counted out on a table. The air smelled wrong for an urban stairwell, less like dust, more like damp leaves in a place without trees. The first landing light flickered alive and settled, yellow and steady. The child started up without looking back. Miriam followed, carrying both umbrellas, the red one heavier than it should have felt. With each landing the sound of dripping grew, though there was no rain in here, no open window, no bucket under a leak. It wasn't a drip exactly. It was a slow pat, 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 like a heartbeat that had chosen to become water. Miriam's breathing matched it without her permission. She hated that and changed her pace, then found herself matching it again. On the third landing she glanced over the rail. Their shadows lay below on the tiles, elongated by the stair light. Hers was fine. The child's shadow had a stretched head, a thin, pulling arm, something trailing on the floor like a ribbon soaked and dragged. Miriam pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth, bit the edge, tasted iron, and looked away. At the top floor the child stopped. A blue door waited there, cleaner than the one at the street, but the same tired color. The child did not touch the wood. She lifted her face instead. Miriam finally saw it, skin pale like paper held to a lamp, eyes shining the way glass looks when it's just been lifted from water. No fear. No smile. Just that wet, lit look like a pond that has decided to look back. "Thank you," the child whispered. The words didn't fog the air. "He hates loud knocks." "He," Miriam said, voice too soft, too late. The blue door creaked open by itself, a slow breath out. A colder air slid over Miriam's arms, raising every small hair. Inside, the hall carpet was dark with water, puddles joined like maps. From the skirting board, a silver fish lay on its side, gill plates lifting once, then still. Miriam took one careful step inside, and the quiet of the apartment deepened around her like depth. The air beyond the blue door felt wrong, like a room kept in a jar. Miriam stepped onto the carpet and it pushed up around her shoes, cool and slow, as if foam had learned how to breathe. The hall bulb hummed. Its light came out greenish, like light through a bottle, and the shadows it threw were soft and softly moving. She told herself it was the rain in her ears, the long day in her legs. She did not look at the fish again. "Where are your parents?" Miriam asked, voice small against the thick hush. "Downstairs," the child said. The answer did not come from the doorway. It came from the kitchen. Miriam turned hard enough that the umbrella handles knocked her thigh. The kitchen door stood open, and the window beyond it was a square of black glass. In that glass the child stood, red umbrella in one hand, yellow boots planted in water that wasn't on the floor. Ripples spread from her ankles in the reflection. On the real linoleum, only wet rings shone where old puddles had dried and come back again. The child by the door did not move. The child in the window tilted her head the slightest degree, as if listening to a sound just beneath the water. Miriam's mouth went dry. She set the two umbrellas against the wall to free her hands, but the red one slid down on its own and tapped the carpet. Its tip began to drip. Not water. Thick strands of weed settled out like hair combed in a lake. A clump of silt fell soft as ash. Something pale and soft slid down one rib and hung there. Paper? No. A torn ticket, warped by water, with a tiny fairy shape printed in a corner. The ink bled into the fabric, leaving a blue bruise. She did not touch the ticket. She did not want to know if it would feel cold or warm. "Your parents are downstairs?" Miriam asked again, quieter because the room wanted her to be quiet. "Do you want me to call them?" The window showed the child smiling, a small, polite smile that didn't move the eyes. The smile belonged to water. It turned the glass into a shallow lake. Miriam could see the streetlights of some other place shining on that lake, and the sheen of oil there, and the dark, blunt back of a fish easing past the reflection's knees. A ripple licked the child's boot and went on its way. The room's air grew colder on Miriam's teeth. A soft flapping sound pulled her gaze down. The silver fish against the skirting board lifted its gill plates once and stilled for good. Its eye was a pin of glass. Its tail twitched not at all. She felt the floor rise and fall under her soles like a sleeper's breath. "Thank you," said a small voice. Miriam looked up fast and saw only her own shape in the oven door, drawn long and thin by the curve of the metal. The thank you felt like a receipt placed on her palm. She didn't want to be thanked. The dripping grew louder, but nothing dripped. It was as if the sound were following her, a patient step behind each of her steps. She tested the kitchen tap out of reflex. No water came. The tap pulsed once under her fingers anyway, like a throat swallowing. She turned back toward the hall. The door was there, the stair beyond it black with old light. Relief rose in her like warmth, then stalled. Something cool slid past her ankles. Nothing she could see exactly, only the feel of a long wet thing deciding not to wrap around her. She fought the urge to kick at the air, to run. The building didn't want running. She could feel its dislike like pressure on her ears. "Be calm," it seemed to say. Be polite. Miriam put one foot into the hall and reached for the knob. It felt wrong under her palm. Not metal. Not wood. Softer, like a wrist held out of courtesy. She jerked her hand back and stared. The knob was only a knob again. Which building is yours? She asked, and hated herself for asking, for playing along with a script she did not write. Blue door, said the reflection girl from the window, patient as rain. Top floor. We are in the top floor, Miriam said, because facts sometimes help. Her voice came out too bright, like a match struck in fog. So, this is home. In the black window, the child lifted one finger and pointed up. Miriam followed the gesture with her eyes. At first the ceiling looked normal. Old white paint, hairline crack, a slow circle of damp. But the damp was too round, too perfect. It thickened to silver, and the silver moved, not falling down but quivering inward as if touched from the far side. She was looking at the underside of a pond. She could feel that truth in her ears. The circle domed, trembled, calmed. A tiny bead separated from the bulge and traveled upward, toward the ceiling, and disappeared into it with a neat click. Rain but wrong. Rain going home. Miriam's hands were shaking now, but she kept them still. She thought of stepping backward. She thought of saying something protective, the way adults say daytime words to make night behave. This is not funny. Excuse me. I'm calling someone. Before she could choose a word, something patted her shoulder from behind. It was a long, cool hand, fingers in a line, a careful, almost kind touch. The way you might comfort someone you do not want to startle. It rested for a breath, soft through her wet coat, and lifted away. Miriam did not turn. She looked into the black window where a second hand, longer than the first, thin as river bone, rested on the reflection of her shoulder and then withdrew into the lake's dark as if pleased she had understood. Hold the umbrella, the reflection girl giggled. The giggle came from the sink's steel throat. It's raining up. Miriam picked up her own umbrella and opened it under the dry ceiling before she could stop herself. The fabric made a low pop. For a heartbeat, the wrong rain drummed on it, tapping from above her head. The sound slid across the cloth and was gone, as if the umbrella had taught the ceiling how to let go. She closed it fast. The room sighed in what felt like relief. The red umbrella, leaning against the wall, gave a small shiver and shed a last string of weed. The ferry ticket clung on, darker now that it had drunk the room. A date showed through the blur, winter 3 years back, then smudged itself as if embarrassed to be read. Your parents are downstairs, Miriam said again, more to make a path in the air than to find an answer. Shall we go meet them? The child in the window blinked, slow as a shutter. In that blink Miriam saw a fairy horn's white mouth. She saw a hand groping in water for a door that would not open, patient, always patient. The blink ended. The glass was only black again, and the kitchen was only a kitchen that had learned too much about weather. Miriam took one step backward, then another, not turning her back until the hall took her. The blue door waited. She reached for the knob with a firm, dry grip and found it metal this time. She pulled. The apartment let her go. The stairwell met her like air after a tunnel. On the landing, the dripping was louder than ever, though the sound had no source she could point to. The child stood in the threshold, small and precise, umbrella tucked. Her head stayed lowered as it had at the crosswalk. In the black pane of the blue door, her reflection stood knee-deep in a lake under a moon that might have been a streetlight and might not have been anything at all. Thank you, she whispered again from somewhere between door and glass. Miriam nodded because that's what you do when someone thanks you and you are not sure who or what they are. Then she stepped back, heel careful on the slick first stair, and began to descend, slow, polite, quiet, carrying the wrong story in her chest like water in a cup that must not spill. The stairwell felt like a throat holding a breath. The light on the landing hummed and made a weak halo on the wall. Miriam kept one hand on the rail, her fingers careful, her shoes placed like she was learning a slow dance. The blue door behind her settled with a sigh, not closed, not open, just watching. Don't knock, said a voice below. Miriam froze. The words came soft, patient, like advice given 100 times. She leaned over the rail. One floor down, a man stood with a rag in his hand. He wore a thin flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, and his hair stuck in wet ropes to his forehead. He was the kind of tired that makes people look honest. Keep your feet where they are, he said, not looking up yet. He wiped the edge of a step with slow, even strokes, like he was polishing a memory that wouldn't stay clean. The first step is slick after rain. Miriam glanced at the tread under her shoe. A thin film lay on it, not water, not oil, something like pond skin. She moved her heel half an inch and felt the film shift against the rubber. The rail seemed to lean into her palm. I didn't knock, she said, keeping her voice small. That's good, he said, finally raising his head. His eyes were kind and used up. He hates loud knocks. Who is he? The question felt like a key in her teeth. We don't say his name, the man answered simply. Anyway, it's not a real name. It's just a place. He gestured at the stairwell. He stands where knocks go when nobody opens. If you knock hard enough and long enough, the knock gets tired. It needs somewhere to live. He's where it lives. Miriam swallowed. She wanted to leave, to step down fast and push through the front door into the real rain where buses hissed and people swore at puddles. But the idea of turning her back on the blue door made the muscles between her shoulders tighten like wire. There's a child, she said. Red umbrella. Yellow boots. I know, the man said. He dabbed the rag against the rail, then hung it on the radiator where it did not drip. We hear her when it rains. He nodded toward the ceiling. You took her to the top floor? She asked. They always do. His tone made the words older than the building. Always. Miriam echoed. When the rain is strong enough to teach people to listen, he said. He jerked his chin toward the door behind her. That flat has been empty for months. Maybe a year. Owner is in Karachi. The pipes burst 3 winters back. The water found its own map. That map doesn't forget. Empty, Miriam repeated. The word felt thin compared to what she had seen. Fish, weeds, the circle of rain in the ceiling that was not rain. People say a family drowned, the man said, weary as if finishing a story before it could begin. There is no river here. Only drains and small lies. Still, the building keeps wet places. It keeps them like photographs. On the wall beside Miriam, a shadow crawled and then stopped. Her own, she told herself, shifted by the light. She didn't check. Come inside for a minute, the man said. You shouldn't be in the stairwell when the building is listening. The building is listening? Miriam asked. He nodded toward the ceiling. The hum of the light deepened, or maybe her ears did. It listens for loud things, he said. Angry steps. Fists on wood. People who want to be heard more than they want to be safe. He gave a small, apologetic shrug. You can pass if you are quiet. Miriam took one slow step down. The slick film stroked her shoe like a tongue and let her weight go. She came level with the man. Up close, he smelled like soap and damp fabric. His hands were clean. A plain gold ring shone dull on his left hand, old and patient. Thank you, Miriam said. Don't thank me, he answered. Thank your feet for being careful. He led her one door down into a small flat lit by a lamp with a tea-stained shade. A woman sat on the sofa with a blanket over her knees and a glass of water on the table. She had the same used-up kindness in her face, like someone who had learned to sleep with one ear open. We saw you from the window, the woman said softly. You walked with her. Miriam nodded. The room smelled normal, detergent, warm dust, a little lemon. But under those smells lay the thin thread of wet rope. She said her parents were downstairs. They always say downstairs, the woman murmured. She did not look at the ceiling when she said it. Downstairs is where the quiet is. People put their quiet there when they don't know where else to put it. Miriam didn't understand, and she did. Who is he? She asked again, because the question would not leave her mouth alone. The man picked up the rag and smoothed it between his fingers as if it were a small animal that needed calming. Something pale and soft was stuck in the weave, a corner of a ticket with a fairy logo blurred to a bruise. He didn't notice it, or he pretended not to. He is the one who answers if you make enough noise, he said. He does not need a door. Doors are just manners. He uses the space behind the knock. That's not real, Miriam whispered. She wanted it to sound like a decision. Came out like a wish. The woman's smile was gentle and sad. Neither is rain that goes upward, she said. And yet you stood under it. A small sound came from the hall. Tap, tap, tap. Not a knock. The ghost of a knock, the shape of one without weight. The woman's hands tightened on the blanket. The man's head turned, and his jaw set in a quiet line. He's awake, the man said mildly, like a weatherman commenting on wind. The light inside the room lowered itself a little, the way a voice sometimes softens without meaning to. Miriam's heartbeat tried to match the old dripping in the walls and almost did. She rubbed her forearms. The fine hairs there stayed up. Why does she ask for help? Miriam asked, staring at the glass of water on the table. The ring under it vanished each time the woman lifted the glass and came back each time she put it down, as if the table were thirsty. Because small people ask, the woman said. Because you are the kind of person who says yes. He can't walk well in open rain. He needs a cover. An umbrella is a door you carry in your hand. Miriam saw again the weeds sliding from the red spokes, the ticket clinging to the rib, the small polite smile that had belonged to water. If I hadn't said yes? You would have gone home and slept, the man said. And someone else would have said yes. The tapping in the hall paused. A new sound followed, a long, slow drag as if a sleeve were being pulled across a wet table. The woman did not look at the door. The man did not stand. Nobody breathed any louder than they had to. He hates loud knocks, the man said again as if finishing a prayer. He doesn't mind the quiet ones. He minds the ones that think doors owe them answers. Miriam realized she was holding her umbrella again and couldn't remember picking it up. She set it gently against the wall, careful not to let the tip touch the rug. Should I leave? She asked, not sure if she meant the flat or the building or the story itself. You will leave, the woman said. But leave like a person, not like a sound. She nodded toward the stairs. Feet careful. Mouth closed. Don't look too long at glass. The man opened the door for her. In the dark reflection of the hall mirror, a small red shape stood at the top landing, patient as rain. When Miriam turned to see it with her eyes, there was only the blue door, a hand's width open, and a circle of damp on the ceiling shining like the underside of a pond. Miriam stepped back into the stairwell. The building listened. She set her heel, then her toe on the first step down, and the slick film let her pass like a tired animal that didn't want to lift its head. Above her, the blue door breathed in. Below her, the ground floor held its quiet like a mouth full of water that must not spill. The man's door closed behind Miriam with a click that felt gentle on purpose. The hallways dripping thin to a faint thread. For a moment she could believe she had stepped sideways into a drier night. Then the lamplight inside the flat breathed once, down, up, and the thin rope smell returned as if the room had remembered. Sit, the woman said. Only a little while. Rooms do better when guests don't stay long. Miriam eased onto the edge of an armchair. The fabric was warm from use. A small heater ticked by the wall, patient and even. On the table, a book lay open but face down as if it had been put to sleep. A glass of water left a ring that vanished, returned, vanished again, the table drinking, the table giving back. We were not always careful, the woman said, drawing the blanket higher. That is the first part of the story. We were loud like everyone. Before the main burst? Miriam asked. The man nodded. He stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the rain. Winter, he said. 3 years back. Pipes cracked all over the block. Streets turned to gutters with their mouths open. The news vans came for a day and left. The water stayed. He looked at the glass without seeing it. It went places water shouldn't go. Under doors. Into sockets. Behind mirrors. It dried, the woman added. Mostly. But the drying left maps. She lifted a framed photo from the shelf and handed it to Miriam. The image showed the couple at some summer fair. A smear of pale tide mark crossed the bottom inch of the picture, the color of old tea. Everything in the building carries a little river now, she said. Even our smiles. Miriam held the frame. The tide mark cut their legs away at the shins. Above it the sun looked warm. She put the photo down carefully as if it might spill. You hear her when it rains, she said. The sentence felt like a ladder rung. She needed something to hold. The girl? The woman folded her fingers together. We never hear her when it is dry. On dry mornings the blue door is only a door. On dry afternoons children run past it and forget its color. But at night when the drains speak, someone always stops at the crosswalk. Someone always says yes. Many someones? Miriam asked. The man smiled without humor. Enough. This city grows people who say yes to small figures and storms. They are our best people. Miriam thought of her own feet moving before her head could weigh the risk, of the small hand that had not touched hers. She rubbed a thumb over her palm as if checking for silt. People tell it like a ghost story, the woman said. We don't. Ghosts ask to be looked at. He doesn't. He prefers your eyes on wood. He wants the echo more than the face. He, Miriam repeated softly. The one who hates loud knocks. The man turned from the window and crouched by a low cupboard. He pulled out a shallow box lined with towels. Inside lay things that did not belong in a linen chest. A hair comb furred with tiny weeds, the corner of a bus pass swollen soft and colorless, a brass key without a cut, a little rubber fish from a child's bath set, its painted eye rubbed away. He set them on the table one by one. They come up, he said. When the rain is strong. From under skirting boards. From behind the wardrobe. The building returns what the water took, bits that never made it back where they belonged. Miriam stared. None of the objects dripped. Each left a small ring of damp that darkened, then cleared like breath on a window. Once, the woman said, I found a shoe in the elevator cage. A child's boot. Yellow. Miriam's own ankle bones cooled at the word. Did you keep it? We put it back in the box, the man said. And the next rain it wasn't there. He held up the brass key between finger and thumb. This one tries to travel. It rolls under doors. It wants to find a lock. Does it fit the blue door? Miriam asked, hearing how foolish and how sensible she sounded at once. No, the woman said. Nothing fits the blue door. That is why he stands there. Silence held for a moment. The heater ticked. Somewhere in the building a pipe clicked like a fingernail against glass. Miriam found herself listening for the tap-tap-tap that had haunted the hall and was almost disappointed when it didn't come. Did you try to move? She asked. You said you packed. We hired a truck, the man said. Loaded the couch, the bed, the boxes. I signed, the driver nodded, rain began. He went to fetch the paperwork I had left upstairs. He was gone a long time. When he came back, a silverfish was on his collar, stuck there like a pin. He lifted his shoulder as if he could still feel the tickle. He said it smelled like the sea in the empty flat. We took that as an answer. We would carry the building with us, the woman added. We are not strong enough for that weight. So we stayed. We learned to be small. Miriam looked at the box again. The comb. The pass. The key with no teeth. They were all so ordinary it made her teeth ache. Ordinary things should not learn how to come up from floors. What about the girl? She asked. Is she water like the rest? The woman's eyes softened at Miriam's use of she. She is the ask, she said. She is the part that needs company to walk into the story. Without her, he is only a room waiting for a noise. She tilted her head. He doesn't make people wicked. He waits for people already tired and angry to pound the wood and demand. He opens for that. For quiet people he offers other doors. Windows. Mirrors. The underside of a ceiling. Miriam remembered the perfect circle above the kitchen, how it had curved and dimpled like a pond tasting rain from below. She felt the patient hand on her shoulder again, the polite pat that had not wanted to frighten her. Why me? She asked, ashamed the instant the words left her mouth. Because you were there, the man said simply. Because you are a person who stops. He likes good manners. They make the door easy to borrow. Borrow? Miriam repeated, feeling the word test her ribs from the inside. The light lowered itself another fraction. The heater ticked twice in apology and went quiet. The thin rope smell thickened. The room was a dock at low tide. From the hallway came a sound that was not tapping and not footsteps. It was the drag Miriam had already learned, the slow pull of something long and soaked being gathered back into itself. The woman breathed out through her nose, a sound like a prayer told to a pillow. We shouldn't keep you, she said. Night gets deeper when you tell it what it is. The man put the comb and the key and the blind fish back into the towel-lined box. He closed the lid as gently as someone tucking in a toddler. Then he stood, and his knees cracked, and he smiled a tired, honest smile that made Miriam trust him the way you sometimes trust people in disasters. Go out quiet, he said. Don't look at the mirror by the elevator. It is trying to learn your face. Miriam rose. Her legs felt steady, which surprised her. She lifted her umbrella and saw, half hidden where the fabric folded, a fragile blue smear, the fairy stamp, the bruise of a logo, like a small country printed on rain. She wanted to tear it free and couldn't. She wanted to keep it and couldn't. The woman touched Miriam's sleeve, a light brush. When you reach the ground floor, she said, there's a door with old paint and no peephole. A sign says quiet please. That is the downstairs she meant. What is behind it? Miriam asked. The woman held Miriam's eyes. The place loud knocks go, she said. We pass it softly. We do not answer if it speaks. The man opened his door. The hall waited. The dripping came back, thin and faithful. Miriam stepped over the threshold and felt the building receive her weight like the surface of a pond that had decided, just for now, to carry a human shape. She did not look at the mirror by the elevator. She did not look at the blue door above. She went toward the sign that asked for quiet and promised nothing in return. The corridor narrowed like a throat that didn't want to swallow. Miriam kept the umbrella close to her leg so the tip wouldn't tick the floor and wake anything that liked sound. Ahead, the old elevator cage waited. A metal lattice with a gate like the spine of a book, its paint rubbed to gray by hands long gone. Everyone in the building said the elevator hadn't worked for years. Tonight it looked busy anyway. The gate was shut. Does it ever close? Miriam whispered to herself. In daylight, the cage sat open on the ground floor like a mouth that forgot how to bite. Now its bars were drawn neat, and a single red drop hung from one crosspiece and did not fall. She could see it breathing, small, patient, rounder each breath as if learning to be a bead. She didn't touch the gate. She set her palm on the wall beside it. The plaster was cool as if a shadow had lived there all day. Through the bars she could see the control panel, broken levers, blind buttons, a cracked plate with floor numbers. Above the panel, the small rectangle of a mirror watched the hallway. It was cheap glass, foxed in the corners, the kind that makes a face look tired and kind at once. Miriam lifted her eyes to the mirror and saw three things. First, herself, smaller than she felt, hair damp in ropes, mouth set in the lines she used for long days. Second, the hallway behind her, empty and long, with the blue door above like a bruise on the skin of the building. Third, a red curve in the far corner of the frame, an umbrella shape that was not in the hallway at all. She turned fast. No red behind her. Only carpet, wall, the old potted plant that had learned how not to grow. She looked back. The umbrella in the mirror was closer now, as if the act of checking had given it permission to step. It was folded, dripless, clean. No weeds clung to its ribs. It looked like a photograph of an umbrella, tidy, weightless, obedient. Don't look too long, the woman had said. The mirror is trying to learn your face. Miriam dropped her eyes to the control panel. The numbers were rubbed thin, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Someone had once scratched a fifth number into the plate with a key 5, then crossed it out, then scratched it again harder. Beside the numbers, faint arrows suggested up and down, but both pointed inward. She breathed through her nose and counted to 7, the way she did when the shop got noisy and her head wanted to tip. On the count of 8, the red drop on the gate quivered and climbed one bar higher, against gravity like a bubble in a slowed film. It left no smear. It simply decided up was down. It's raining up, the child had giggled. Miriam could hear that voice again, pleasant, patient, not trying to scare anyone. That voice made her more afraid than shouting ever could. There were footsteps above her. No, not footsteps. The careful weight of someone placing a heel, then a toe, the way she had been taught to walk on wet stairs. Miriam lifted her chin. The blue door on the top landing sat open the width of a hand. The slice of darkness behind it looked dressed, as if it had put on a room to look polite. Keep going, she told herself. Ground floor. Quiet please door. You can do this. But her feet didn't choose the stairs. They chose the elevator. She did not open the gate. She only stepped close enough that the mirror framed her from shoulder to shoulder. The red curve at the edge grew by the smallest degree, as if the frame had nudged itself inward to include a guest. It was the wrong kind of welcome. Miriam raised the black umbrella slowly and tilted its canopy so that its edge cut across the mirror, dividing her reflection from the halls. The membrane of the moment changed. Sounds came clearer and farther away at once. The dripping that had followed her since the blue door softened, as if dissuaded by the new roof. The building's hum concentrated itself into a point behind the glass. I can't knock, Miriam said to the mirror, feeling stupid and brave in equal parts. But I can listen. Her breath smeared the glass like a white thumbprint. The mirror swallowed it at once and gave her a different picture. A corridor, not this corridor. Water at ankle height, moving without a source. Light from street lamps lifting and sinking like fish. On the far side of the frame stood a child with a red umbrella open over her head. Her face was pale and uncreased like paper not yet folded. The umbrella did not drip. The water did. Home is close, the child said. But the words didn't come from the mouth. They came from the metal, out of the breathless buttons, the blind slot where coins might have been. The voice used the elevator to speak the way wind uses a bottle. Miriam lifted her free hand toward the glass. The mirror cooled the air a degree. The child in the other corridor raised her own hand to meet it, and just before their palms matched, something long and thin slid between them. 2 fingers, too many knuckles, pale as rope kept in the dark. The fingers patted Miriam's reflection's wrist once, kindly like earlier, then withdrew. The child's hand disappeared into red cloth as if the umbrella had pockets. No, Miriam said. Come. Not a shout. She set the black umbrella's tip on the floor, making no sound, and tilted the canopy away. The mirror went dull. Foxing bloomed larger in the corners, like lichen feeding on a stone. The red curve shrank back to the edge of the frame and shivered, as if the glass had become a cold field. A new sound rose from the shaft where the elevator car should have hung. Not machinery, never that. This was the long pull she had come to know, a drag like a soaked sleeve gathered inch by inch over a wooden table. A small shape drifted up out of the darkness and stopped behind the gate. At first Miriam thought it was a fish. But it held still too deliberately, facing her as if presenting itself. A yellow boot. Child size. Rubber dulled to a matte skin. A scuff at the toe where a curb had once pushed back. It hovered at gate height, heel down, toe up, like a foot paused on an invisible stair. Miriam's stomach dropped the way it does on a lift that wants to teach you humility. She did not reach. She did not speak. She let the boot float, and when it turned a slow half-circle to show its hollow inside, she looked away. Not up, not into the mirror, at the floor where the carpets we've made a small map of rivers that didn't exist. Do you see it? Said a voice behind her. Not the child, not the man from the flat. The voice wore politeness like a coat. Quietly. She didn't turn. Turning felt like permission. Yes, Miriam said, and her mouth was so dry that the words scraped. I see it. Then you can go, said the voice. He only likes the ones who knock twice. The red drop on the gate climbed another rung toward the ceiling and vanished against the bar, leaving a bright clean dot like a new nail head. The boot drifted back into the shaft and fell without falling, sinking the way a thought sinks when you refuse it. The drag sound followed it down, long and patient, and became the faintest of taps. Tap, tap, tap. From below, where the quiet please door waited like an ear. Miriam stepped away from the cage. Her shoulder brushed the wall, and the plaster remembered heat. She could feel the narrow building decide to let her pass, the way a crowd does when someone is carrying a sleeping child. She put one foot on the first stair. The slick filmed their thought about being dangerous and then changed its mind. At the turn of the stair she glanced once more, just once, at the mirror. Her reflection looked back, hair rope damp, eyes too bright. In the frame's top corner, the red umbrella had become a red smear, like a thumbprint on an old photograph. She did not stop to watch it sharpen. The ground floor waited below like low water. The sign over the corridor said quiet please in letters that had been painted by a tired hand. Miriam exhaled through her nose and moved toward it, counting her steps in her head, choosing each number as if it were a key in the future, a door she had been asked to open without knocking at all. The sign waited where the corridor narrowed to a hush. Quiet please, hand-painted in letters that leaned like tired men. The paint had a dull shine as if licked smooth by years of eyes. Beyond it the air cooled. The sound of the building, the old hum, the patient drip, thinned until Miriam could hear smaller things. The nap of the carpet catching on her soles, her own breath clicking at the back of her throat, the soft rub of umbrella fabric under her palm. The door itself looked ordinary the way some knives do. Old paint, no peephole, a handle worn to the color of tea. The skirting board on either side was clean, too clean, as if someone wiped it each time the room exhaled. A hairline crack ran along the jamb like a seam in skin. Miriam stood where the woman had told her to stand. Here is safe. There is not. The wood tasted the hallway with a long inward sigh. A ribbon of wet slid from beneath and stopped exactly at the toe of Miriam's shoe, not touching, not spreading, just drawing its thin line and settling, a boundary drawn by a quiet hand. The water was clear. In it she could see the ceiling bulb reflected, small and patient. When the bulb flickered, the reflection did not. She kept her voice in her chest. Her thoughts tried to grow big and she pressed them small again, the way you press dough back into a bowl. Feet careful. Mouth closed. Don't look too long at glass. She had learned the building's rules by listening to what it praised and what it punished. From the far side of the door came a sound like a sleeve pulled across a table, slow, steady, a drag that did not tire. Miriam's shoulder blades tightened. She imagined, without wanting to, length, the kind of length that made corridors seem shorter than the thing that traveled them. Then the knocking began. It was not violent. It was not angry. It was the knock of someone raised on manners, the kind people give to a nursery door at night. 3 knuckles evenly spaced. Pause. 3 again. Like a metronome that had learned to be tender. Miriam thought of every door she had opened because a polite voice asked. Of every customer who began low and kind and sharpened only later. In her chest, a habit rose, the one that makes hands obey before minds decide. She made her hands still. The knock paused. A voice pressed through, gentle the way cold can be gentle if it waits long enough. He hates loud knocks, it said. It was a man's voice speaking like a building. The words were rounded, the breath measured. He wore someone else's mouth and spoke with care, like a guest borrowing a suit that wasn't his size. The sound didn't travel under the door so much as through the wood, as if it liked being a door more than being a voice. Miriam's tongue wanted to answer. Who are you? Her teeth held the question and did not let it pass. A new sound roused behind her, A step on the stair, then a second. The man from the floor above came into view, not close, just enough that she could see his shoulder and the thinning pattern on his flannel. He lifted a hand without raising it, a gesture like setting a cup down where it won't clink. "Stand where you are," he said softly. "That's the line." Miriam didn't turn fully. She watched the bright wet ribbon at her toes and measured her breath to it. When she breathed in, it made a tiny inward shiver. When she breathed out, it slicked itself smooth, pleased. The door sighed again. Someone shifted weight on the other side. She saw it only in the water, a pale length passing, knotted in places like rope stored too long in a dark, damp cupboard. Not a leg. Not an arm. The idea of either stretched wrong by the place it had learned to live. "Home is close," the voice said, as if repeating a memory back to the person it had taken it from. "Will you walk me?" It sounded almost hopeful. Almost. Miriam felt a small ache for the trick inside it. The ache was for herself, not for the voice. She kept her mouth shut. The knock returned, a fraction firmer. 3. Pause. 3. On each set, the waterline jumped in neat circles, like a pond under light rain. To her left, the elevator cage creaked. No movement, only the idea of movement. The building was listening, and it liked the quiet so much it wanted to become more of it. The man on the stair spoke, still low. "He collects the sound of people who insist," he said. "They knock and think they are owed an answer. He answers. They become his answer." He nodded at the door. "This is where the answers stay when they are done answering. This is why we do not knock." Miriam pictured a little cupboard in the dark, full of old replies. "Who's there? Open up, please." Replies losing their edges until only the need remained, a shape with no words left to wear. The handle twitched, once purely to show it could. Miriam's knees thought about becoming water. She leaned her weight into her heels and remembered the umbrella in her hand. "A door you carry. A small roof that belongs to you." Without opening it, she lifted the umbrella above her head, inside the hallways dry. The fabric made that soft pop, like a held breath changing its mind. The wet line at her toes settled, pleased by the new shadow. The next 3 knocks came and went without making circles. "Good," the man murmured. "You keep your weather." The voice behind the door tried another script. "Thank you," it said, almost delicate. "He hates loud knocks." Miriam heard, tucked under the words, the clink of a glass on a table, the hush of a soft rug under careful feet, a child's rubber boot scuffing at a curb. The room behind the door wore these sounds like borrowed clothes. She thought, unkindly and with relief, "You are only echoes." The echo did not mind. It shifted to kindness again. "You can open," it said, mild as a waiter. Quietly. Miriam's fingers tightened on the umbrella handle until the plastic clicked. She kept her eyes down. In the thin strip of water, the handle on the far side turned a little, trying, testing, learning the motion in case she would give it hers. "No," Miriam said at last, one word, honest and soft like giving back a thing you could not carry. The hallway held the syllable, smoothed its edges and let it settle. From behind the door came a lengthening silence. It felt like the moment when a polite person realizes you will not bend, and a different shape shows beneath their smile. Not anger. Something older than anger and less work. The drag came again, moving away now, long and regular, gathering itself like wet cloth pulled back across a table. The knock did not return. The handle stilled. The waterline thinned until it was only a pencil mark on the tile, then drew itself in and was gone. Miriam lowered the umbrella and closed it. The air warmed a degree, the bulb's filament brightened, and the corridor remembered how to be a corridor. The sign over the jamb, "Quiet please," looked less like a rule and more like a truth the building had learned the hard way. The man stayed where he was, 2 steps up, not crowding the space the door had just left. "Now you can leave," he said. Like a person. Miriam turned without stepping over the line where the water had been. She passed the elevator without glancing at the mirror. She put her palm to the wall as she went, as if to thank it for not moving, and the plaster returned her heat like a held hand. At the bend of the stairs she paused and, despite herself, looked up. The blue door on the top landing sat open the width of a hand. In the small pane beside it, the kitchen window showed only her own small reflection and the lamp behind her. No lake. No weeds. No fish. A memory lingered at her shoulder, the careful pat from before, the polite touch. She did not shrug it off. She let it be a thing that had happened in a place that had learned to keep its weather inside. "Thank you," she said, barely louder than the sign. The building, a patient animal, a tired host, did not answer. It simply made a path for her feet that went down and out. Miriam reached the ground floor bend and stopped. The corridor ahead led to the street. Real rain, bus brakes, the safe ordinary of wet neon. But the air behind her still held a shape, like a hand not yet taken away. It was the patient outline of a request. Walk me. She felt it at the base of her neck, a small cold coin that would not melt. She should go. She knew that. Leave like a person, not like a sound. She took one step toward the door, then another. On the second step, the building shifted. No movement, only a change in listening. The quiet thickened as if a wall had leaned closer to hear. The hair on Miriam's arms rose. She stopped. Above, a faint giggle traveled down the stairwell, bright as a bead rolling along wood. It's raining up, the child said, pleasant, patient, like a teacher reminding a class of a simple rule. Miriam stood a moment longer, counting the beat of her heart against the hush. Then she turned and climbed, slow, polite, keeping her feet careful and her eyes off reflective things. The old elevator cage watched her without rattling. The red dot that had climbed the gate earlier was gone now, swallowed into metal. A draft moved along the stair, not cold, not warm, like the brush of a sleeve. On the top landing, the blue door stood open the width of a hand. The slice of room behind it looked as before, a hall dark with damp, the kitchen window a square of glass with nothing to show. But the ceiling held a change. The perfect circle of wet had cleared to something more exact. A held surface, silver and still, like a lake pretending to be plaster. Miriam did not cross the threshold. She took her place at the line between hall and flat and lifted her umbrella, her own black dry, into the room's air. When the canopy opened, it made the soft sound of a breath untying itself. Drops tapped it from above. Not from the sky. From the ceiling lake. They were tiny at first, like the music of small beads. Each drop struck the cloth and slid along the ribs, then vanished at the edge in a neat, upward curl, as if the umbrella had learned a trick, how to return rain to its source without letting it touch the floor. Miriam held the handle steady. She felt the suggestion of pressure in the air around the canopy, a mild downward push as if the room were trying the weight of her weather. The black cloth held. The child's voice came from the kitchen, not the doorway, not the hall, but the room that liked glass. Hold it, she giggled. It's raining up. I'm holding, Miriam said, more to herself than to anyone else. I'm here. In the kitchen window, the dark thickened into shape. A small figure stood in shallow water on the other side of the glass. Red umbrella open, yellow boots sunk a little into silt. Her face was pale as paper, eyes wet as glass. She lifted one hand and pointed, not at Miriam, not at the door, but at the space under the black umbrella. Walk me, the reflection said softly. But not through halls. Miriam understood in the simple, fever-clear way she had begun to understand this building. The umbrella was a door you could carry. A roof you could share. If she stepped forward one pace, still standing outside the flat but extending the small circle of dry into it, she would be making a path that was not floor. She stepped once. The canopy crossed the threshold. The air under it changed texture as if someone had ironed it flat. A string of weed loosened from the ceiling circle and fell upward, rejoining the silver. The fish by the skirting board rolled once, and its eye went from glass pale to ordinary dull, then back again like a blink. The ferry ticket stuck to the red umbrella's rib in the window flexed and showed a corner of date before smudging itself shy. Miriam kept her feet on the hall tile. She did not enter. The building liked lines. She would not give it the pleasure of seeing her forget them. In the window, the child stepped forward into the black umbrella's shadow. The reflection made a tiny echo of a footfall, as if water can imitate weight if asked nicely. Something long and pale slid just behind the child, a courteous presence like a hand not quite touching a shoulder. The hand from before. The careful touch. Miriam found her voice. Where are your parents? She asked, not because an answer would help, but because questions sometimes make rooms show their seams. Downstairs, the reflection said, but the word wore a different weight now. It sounded like the name of a drawer where you put things you cannot throw away and cannot use. Do you want to go there? Miriam asked. The child tilted her head. In the glass, the lake's surface ruffled, then calmed. He hates loud knocks, she said, the way children recite family rules. He waits. We won't knock, Miriam said. We'll leave doors for people who live on this side of them. The ceiling lake quivered, pleased. A bead formed at its underside, grew, let go, and flew upward to rejoin the silver. The umbrella trembled in Miriam's hand, a polite tug, like someone testing how much shelter they were allowed to borrow. Only this much, Miriam said, steady. Only to the threshold. The reflection child nodded. The gesture was so small it might have been a stirring of the lake's skin. A soft laugh rippled from the sink's steel throat, brief, not mocking. Around the black canopy, the air cooled as if evening had decided to visit indoors. The building's hum narrowed to a point above them and listened. For a moment, everything held: ceiling water, umbrella, hand, hall, Miriam's breath. In that hold, Miriam felt the story shift. Not end. Like a door that decides to be a wall again. The long, pale presence behind the child withdrew a measure, not angry, just finished with the moment. The weeds that had drooled from the red spokes earlier drew back up into the umbrella as though they had forgotten why they fell. The ferry ticket relaxed its grip and fluttered down the glass in a slow slide that left no wet behind. The child stepped backward in the window into darker shallows. The red umbrella lowered to hide her face. Only the boots showed, yellow coins in the silt. "Thank you," she said, and this time the word belonged to the air, not the sink. It did not try to be a trick. Miriam closed her own umbrella. The ceiling circle stayed calm. No drops tapped her hair. No hand patted her shoulder. The room breathed out the way a person does after a long, hard thought. Behind Miriam, the man from the floor below stood 2 steps down, careful not to crowd. His voice came low and even. "That's enough," he said. "Never bring anything out. Never take anything in." "I didn't," Miriam answered. It felt important to say. "I kept my weather." He nodded. "Good." They stood like that for a few breaths, 3 people in a room all learning the new shape of quiet. On the skirting board, the silver fish settled into stillness that was only stillness, not a pose. In the far corner, a small trail of water that had made its way across the carpet decided it was a thread and vanished into the weave. Miriam looked once more at the window. Her own reflection looked back now, tired, calm, wet hair like rope. No lake. No child. Only a square of night that belonged to a city and not to a story. She lowered her eyes and stepped away from the threshold. The blue door did not move. The building's listening softened as if it had set something down. On the stair, she felt the slick film think about testing her and then decide to behave. The elevator cage held its breath like an old animal that had been fed. The red dot did not return. At the bend, Miriam paused. The rain outside reached the window in the stairwell, streaking it with honest water that fell the right way. A bus sighed on the street. Someone laughed 2 blocks over, a sound with edges and a throat. "It's raining up," the child had said. "It isn't now," Miriam whispered, not to correct but to name what she wanted. Then she went down and out, carrying her small door, her small roof, and the exact amount of weather she was willing to share. The outside door breathed her out like warm fog. Real rain met Miriam's cheeks, honest drops that fell the right way. Bus brakes sighed at the corner. A motorcycle stitched a white seam through puddles and was gone. The world had edges again. She stood one moment under the awning, letting the kind noise wash the hallway out of her ears, and then she stepped into the street. Her umbrella went up with the soft pop she now knew by heart. The fabric caught the rain, spread it, gave it back to the gutter with no tricks. Water made normal sounds: patter, hiss, drip. Nothing tugged upward. No hand, polite or otherwise, touched her shoulder. She walked. She took the long route toward the corner shop on purpose, choosing blocks with glass fronts so she could test the night for reflections that weren't hers. In the bakery window, she saw only trays stacked in rows like sleeping roofs. In the barber's black mirror, she saw her own tired face, slightly stretched the way old glass does. In the travel agency door, ferry specials, a faded poster, she paused. The ink blue boat in the picture had thrown a shadow on the water printed below. That water did not move. She watched until her eyes stung and laughed under her breath at herself for needing to be so sure. At the shop, the owner looked up from the counter, hair damp and wild with the evening. "Late?" he said, not unkindly. "You okay?" "I am," Miriam said, surprised at how simple and true it felt. She set the black umbrella in the stand near the door. A second umbrella lay there already, cheap, red, ribs bent at the tips from wind. She touched it and felt only plastic, no weed smell, no bruise of fairy ink. The owner poured her tea without asking. "Crazy rain," he said, as if the weather might answer him. He tapped a finger against the window. "That building down the block, blue door, leaking again." "Heard it from the vendor." Miriam blew across the cup. Steam fogged the glass, cleared. "It learns to keep its weather," she said softly. "What?" "Nothing." She sipped. Heat put her hands back into her body. When the rain eased, she closed the shop with him. She tucked the day's notes under the till, turned the key, checked the back door twice. Routine, small and exact, felt like a blessing. Outside, the gutters muttered but did not speak. She walked home with her umbrella angled against the wind. In her apartment, she leaned the umbrella in its corner by the door. In the morning, she expected the mat to wear a dark ring like a bruise. It didn't. The floor was clean and dry. But clinging to one rib, flattened like a moth, a strip of paper had dried itself into place. She peeled it free. A logo, blue as a vein, suggested a fairy. The date was there if she didn't stare, gone if she did. She held the strip under the running tap. The ink bled and ran until the paper became only paper. She laid it on the windowsill and watched it become light enough to lift at the corners when a proper breeze wandered by. From that day, Miriam changed small things. She kept a spare umbrella, a plain black one with a stiff spine, under the shop counter. When strangers came in soaked and anxious, asking for the quickest way to the top floor with the blue door, she poured tea first. "Sit a minute," she would say gently. "Tell me which home you mean." Some blinked and laughed and realized they were only lost in the ordinary way. A few stared past her at the rain and said downstairs like the word hurt their teeth. For those, she learned a sentence that felt like a lock you could carry: "I won't open for the things that want me to disappear." She said it softly. It worked better that way. On hard storm nights, she walked the long way home and past the building. Sometimes the blue door was only a blue door. Sometimes it stood open the width of a hand. On those nights she did not pause. She kept her feet careful, her eyes off the elevator mirror, her breath matched to the honest rain. Once, curiosity tugged and she looked through the small pane by the kitchen, ready to correct herself like a scolded child if the lake had returned. The window showed a hallway with a lamp off and a floor the ordinary color of carpet. On the sill, under a thin strip of sunlight that had escaped a cloud, a single silverfish had dried to paper. It looked like a letter opener forgotten on a desk. She felt sorry for it for exactly one breath and let the feeling go. The man and woman from the floor below became nodding neighbors. Sometimes she brought them bread at closing if the day had been slow. Sometimes they lent her a socket set or a step stool. They did not tell more stories, they did not need to. Neighbors do not need to explain quiet. They simply keep it together. Once the man said, "He's softer now. Less hungry." The woman touched his sleeve the way you touch a sentence so it stays kind. Miriam nodded. She knew the feel of softer, the slick film on the stairs that thought about being danger and became only shine, the knock that practiced and then forgot the shape of its own hand. Summer came. The city warmed. The drains whispered like old pets dreaming. Children played in the lane with plastic boats and brown water left from a short storm. A busker set up by the shop and sang the same 5 songs until people loved them. On a warm evening, a fairy horn carried from the river miles away, a low, friendly animal sound. Miriam stopped in the doorway and listened until the last thread of it pulled itself through the buildings and went thin. She thought of the ticket, now blank, of the hand that had patted her shoulder with care, of a child who was more asked than person. She thought, not without pity and not without limits, be well where you are. Stay there. Sometimes at closing, the glass in the shop window caught a child-shaped red curve for a heartbeat. Umbrella, boots, the pause of someone at a crosswalk. When she turned, the pavement held only rain. When she looked back at the glass, she saw her own outline and the owner counting coins in the reflection of the till. She smiled at both and locked up. On the first dry night after a week of storms, she walked past the blue door and found it wide to the street. The hall inside smelled like dusty sun. No damp map stained the carpet. No patient drip marked time. The window by the kitchen held only her own small figure and the sky behind her, pale as paper. She stood at the threshold, did not step in, lifted her umbrella anyway and felt foolish and safe all at once, as if muscles were learning new habits and needed rehearsal even when no test waited. "Thank you," she said, not to the building and not to the air exactly, but to the idea of a door that had stayed a door. The city answered with a scooter horn, a neighbor calling a cat, the easy chorus of people who belonged to weather and not the other way around. Miriam went home. She put the black umbrella in its corner and the spare under the counter at work. When rain came again, as rain always does, and a little figure appeared at the crosswalk with a red umbrella and yellow boots, the only person the child asked to walk her was the child's own reflection, waiting in the soft dark of a shop window. 2 small roofs touched just for a second. Then the night remembered itself, and the street remembered its slope, and the water ran the right way.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Leave us a comment for more stories like this. Your support means the world. Stay tuned for more videos.